Hello, my name is Keith Richards. I'm the CEO of agileKRC, and in conjunction with the Agile Business Consortium, I'm presenting a video on prioritization using the MoSCoW technique. In terms of the structure of the video, we're going to look at why we need to prioritize, when to use MoSCoW and when not to use MoSCoW, and some of the basic tools and techniques that you can use with MoSCoW, because on the face of it, it's quite easy, but when you use it in practice, you sometimes encounter quite a few problems. I'm going to take you through those and explain how to get over them. Just a quick introduction. My name's Keith Richards, and I'm not the real Keith Richards, but I've been involved in Agile for 20 years now. I happen to have been lead author for Prince to Agile, but also back in 2007, I was the lead author for DSDM, which went on to become Agile PM. So MoSCoW has always been something I've been using for a long time. In terms of the importance of prioritization, I'm going to take you through some basic fundamentals about why we're doing this and why it's so specific and so important to Agile. One of the big things with Agile is that you're trying to hit deadlines. Whether you're using words like sprint, time box, you're always trying to hit deadlines, and these deadlines shouldn't be moving. Well, that's the good practice to make sure they don't move. Well, if the deadline's not moving, there really is only one option left to you, and that is to prioritize the work that you're doing inside that time box. Importantly, one of the variables inside any time box is not quality. So if you're doing too much, you'll end up compromising the quality, probably by reduced testing, probably by lessening the amount of documentation. Even worse, you're probably compromising the underlying design. This leads to something called through-life cost. So we've got to be very strict and harsh and thorough with the prioritization. This is the option we go to in Agile. If you had to write down a few words on a piece of paper about what Agile is, the word prioritization would be up there very early. Another feature of prioritization is it enables you to handle change at the detailed level. This doesn't mean we rethink the reason for the project. That would be called baseline change. But if we're trying to fine-tune our understanding of what we're trying to achieve, then the idea of trading things in and out and prioritizing is a very important thing to do. So prioritization enables us to get a more accurate solution. It enables us to respond to changing circumstances that may take place on the project. So what is MoSCoW prioritization, apart from being a fundamental part of the DSDM and Agile PM approach since 1995? Well, firstly, a name check to a guy called Clegg. He created it in the 1990s. It was his idea, and it's been developed and built on since then, but it's pretty lucky that that guy came up with that idea. In very simple terms, the M, so when we're looking at a feature, a function or a requirement, M means we must have it. There is no other choice. S means we should have it, C, could have, and W means won't have for now. The O's are just there for fun. But if you think about anything, for example, packing a suitcase to go on holiday, what must be there or you just won't go? What should be there, as in you're really not going to be very happy if you've forgotten it, but what could be there? In other words, possibly a nice to have, maybe not a big issue if you forget it, but the whole point of MoSCoW is you prioritize everything you're doing in order to hit the deadline, or using the holiday analogy, in order to catch the plane. I mentioned that prioritization is quite a fundamental concept in Agile, and that is because life has been different if you go back over the decades. Traditional project management has used a different set of constraints. If you like, this is epitomized by the iron triangle or the TQC triangle, namely time, quality and cost. This, if you like, is how most people have been brought up over the decades, that these are the three variables that we use. Now, when I say three variables we use, even then you still shouldn't be using quality as a variable. Quality, or the quality level, should be sort of decided at the outset, and the business case will probably be predicated on this. So traditionally we played with time and cost, or time and resources. We either move deadlines or we throw bodies at a problem. This is not the Agile way of doing things. Agile, if you like, has brought in a brand new constraint which is called scope. So scope, features, requirements, functions, whatever you want to call it, this is the constraint or the variable that we play with on an Agile project. Now, a lot of you have been using project management for a long time and you've probably been playing with scope anyway. What I'm trying to say is that this is the center of attention and this is the way Agile works. Time is fixed because we're time boxing. Resources are fixed. We're trying to move quickly over, say, 2 to 4 weeks. Quality is fixed because you shouldn't be playing with quality. There's one place left to go. Now, context is important for MoSCoW. I see MoSCoW misplaced, misapplied, and one of the biggest things you've got to be very clear is that you might actually not need it. If you've got an existing product development and you have a great big backlog of things to do, if you like, by analogy, if you've got a house and you have enhancements to do to your house, DIY jobs, you just put them in a big list and do the most important first. Now this is, if you like, a BAU or business as usual environment. So when you have a product, you're enhancing it, it's never ending, you'd be more inclined to use some form of ordering. And to be honest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to N is the preferred or the best way of working in that environment. But if you're in a project environment, this is different. Projects are finite, they have a business case, they have a sort of a reason for existing, and it's not quite the same as a conveyor belt and doing lots and lots of little independent jobs. There's a lot of dependencies on a project. There are a lot of groupings. And therefore, when you're working in a project where a team comes together to try and achieve some sort of product in a predetermined period of time, this is where MoSCoW is very, very good. And even though I say it's very good, people still struggle. Think about how you build a house. So if you build the kitchen and then you build the lounge and then you build the bedrooms, you don't do all the most important things first. So it's not a question of the most important thing is the roof, so let's build the roof. You do things in a sequence. And it may be that when you're doing the kitchen, you are building features for the kitchen that are not must-haves. Yet you haven't even started working on the lounge yet, where there'll be must-haves there. So one of the common misconceptions with MoSCoW is that you do all the musts first, but the truth is you don't. But if you're trying to hit a deadline, if you're trying to get to a certain endpoint, then MoSCoW allows you to keep moving and keep hitting these interim deliverables so that you don't spend too much time on the kitchen and too much time on the lounge. You can keep moving on and staying on track. Think about how you'd build an ordering system. If you had an ordering element, a payment element, and a stock control element, you work on the ordering element because this is where everything is, if you like, as a group. And there'll be musts, shoulds and coulds in that area. But it means that if that bit takes, say, a month, it means the ordering system or the ordering element will be finished after 1 month because you're going to trade out things like some coulds. So importantly, MoSCoW tries to keep you on time over the whole project, but also on time over key deliveries during that project. I find one of the best analogies is to think about how you go shopping in a supermarket. Imagine you're shopping in a supermarket and you have to finish by a certain time because you've got a train to catch. If you've got 4 aisles that you need to go to, I don't know, vegetables, cheese, fizzy drinks, you don't do all the musts first. You tend to shop in groups. But if you're over by the vegetables and you're running a bit late, you need to move on when you've got, if you like, your musts and shoulds. So this MoSCoW system works on the basis that there's dependencies. So in a physical layout of a shopping centre, you need to go to the vegetables, go to the cheese area, go to the fizzy drinks area. These are a long way apart. You don't want to visit these things 3 times because you're doing all the musts first. So as I say, the context is really important for MoSCoW. MoSCoW works really well in the project context. If you take the house analogy again, if you've just got some DIY jobs, you just do the most important one first and work down the list. So what is the classic question I hear all the time, and anyone using MoSCoW is used to this? Everything seems to be a must-have. Well, very normal concern, but the good news, it's not true, and it's addressed by one simple question. And the question is, will it work without it? If I give you something that doesn't have that one particular thing, do you want any of it? And that's the key question. Without that one thing, you don't want anything, therefore it's a must-have. So for example, a car without an engine or a car without wheels just doesn't make any sense. But if there's electric windows not in the back, well, maybe I can work around that. But the key thing with must is must means must. It means it just doesn't work, you don't do anything without it. A good example with the holiday analogy that I'm using is it's a bit like your passport. You wouldn't get in the car and drive to the airport if you didn't have a passport. Whereas if you didn't have your t-shirts, you should have packed them, and it's a mistake, but you're not going to turn around and go back to get your t-shirts. Must means must. There's no other option. One rule that's often used a lot in MoSCoW, and it causes a lot of confusion to be honest, is the 60-20-20 rule. But importantly, it's a rule of thumb. It is just a guideline. It's not a fact. If you're prioritising and you find you have 50% of your work is must-have, don't try and increase it to 60. Just go with what you got. It's a nice guideline though, and if you could load a time box this way, it's slightly idealistic, slightly theoretical, but if you can load a time box this way, you're giving yourself a lot of room for manoeuvre here. One of the key values, just from experience and from everyone in the DSDM and Agile PM community, is this 60%. It just seems to be a nice sort of figure. Once you move over that and more of your effort is greater than 60%, it starts to get into some slightly trickier areas where the risk is actually going up. Now remember the 60-20-20 rule, meaning 60% musts, 20% shoulds, 20% coulds, relates to effort, not the number of requirements. In technical terms, the 60% there, if you've got the musts, it refers to what's called the minimum usable subset. If you look closely, you can see the word must in there. But the musts represent what is the minimum. Now I have to be clear here, if you just delivered the minimum, it maybe isn't cause for celebration. To me, the guide I use personally is get all the musts done, get all the shoulds done, and as many of the coulds as you can. Okay, it's unlikely you'll get everything done. You may get lucky occasionally, but the point being is that a very big learning point that I'd like to get across, or try to get across to my customers, is that any shoulds that are missing are bad news. The reason they're called shoulds is because they should be there. That's why they're called shoulds. Taking the t-shirt example, you should have packed your t-shirt. Now you should be able to guarantee within reason, within sort of reasonable limits, that fact you can actually deliver all the musts. Remember, if 60% or less of your effort is must-have, that's an awful lot of contingency in there. Now if we're down in a 2-week time box and 40% of your features you're trying to deliver there are contingency, you'll have a very bad time box if you don't at least get the minimum usable subset across the line. Like I say, look to deliver the musts and shoulds and as many coulds as you can.